Hello, my name is Daniel Schoonmaker, and I'm the Executive Director of West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum and the facilitator of the Michigan Sustainable Business Forum. I am excited to be able to present this forum on resiliency and sustainability in Michigan in partnership with the Southeast Michigan Sustainable Business Forum and the American Sustainable Business Council. Today, featuring Representative Andy Levin of the 9th Congressional District. For those that are not aware, Michigan Sustainable Business Forum is a project of West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum intended to promote business practices and policy that advance climate leadership, community resilience, social justice, and the creation of a circular economy. This is part of a project that we've been working on with support from the Environmental Defense Fund in partnership with the American Sustainable Business Council and others to elevate the need for public sector leadership to protect our communities and economy from present and emerging threats, specifically COVID-19 and climate change, and to provide an opportunity to current and potential elected representatives to hear about the concerns of impacted business and community leaders. Our panelists today include U.S. Representative Andy Levin, Mayor Melanie Piana, City of Ferndale, Julie Lyons Bricker, Energy Sustainability Manager, City of Royal Oak, Rifino Valentine, Founder and President of Valentine Distilling, and Jeffrey Andresen, Professor and State Climatologist for Michigan State University. And finally, Marta Johnson of the American Sustainable Business Council. Thank you everyone for joining us today. The next hour is going to go by pretty fast, and we're really looking forward to this great discussion. I'd like to first turn the screen over to Mr. Levin for some initial remarks. Andy, the screen is yours.
Thanks, Dan. It's so great to see you. Can you hear me all right?
Coming in just fine.
Okay, super. Well, I've really been looking forward to this convening with all of you as we all work together to combat climate change and all the foundational ways it's impacting all of our communities. It's really the most pressing issue in big picture terms of our lifetimes. We've seen the devastating effects of our Earth warming up due to the excessive emissions of toxic greenhouse gases and pollutants in our atmosphere, in our land, in our waterways. And we know these effects disproportionately harm communities of color, and kids are especially vulnerable. Here in Michigan, our Great Lakes have reached record high water levels. We've had extreme flooding, erosion of shorelines. Recently, we've seen nationally, at the same time, huge wildfires in one part of the country and hurricanes and tropical storms in other parts. Our planet is screaming out to us that a green future is our only future. And we need bold action to make this a reality, and we need it right now. As some of you may know, I've spent the better half of my career fighting for clean energy and workers' rights and the nexus of the two. In 2008, I began my big jump into the green economy space on a mission to unite my two passions, sustainability and workforce development. At the time, I was at what was called DLAG. It's not there anymore, but for the state of Michigan. And we created a Michigan Green Jobs Initiative that included the first Green Jobs Report for our state in 2009, and new programs like the Michigan Academy for Green Mobility Alliance, which is still there, training hundreds of unemployed and incumbent engineers to electrify vehicles. In 2011, I founded Levin Energy Partners and Lean and Green Michigan, a statewide property assessed clean energy program, and Dan was super partner in all that for West Michigan to help finance clean energy building improvements, which is really important for helping shape Michigan's environmental future. The year that I was elected to Congress, we did almost $18 million in clean energy projects. And I'm long gone. Unlike some people, I did not continue with my private business activity when I went into public service, but it's still there. And meanwhile, I've shifted my focus to national policy. And I just want to give you an example of my legislative focus. Probably the biggest one in this area to date has been my Electric Vehicle Freedom Act, or EV Freedom Act. And this bill would create a national network of publicly available EV charging infrastructure within 5 years. And the whole national network, not just the interstates, the national highways, 2-lane and 4-lane. And it's the type of bold legislation we need and the type of public investment we need to transform our transportation system while ensuring frontline communities and workers are not left behind. It's an example of the kind of legislation we need to cover every aspect of the economy, because we have to change profoundly land management, agriculture, manufacturing, our built environment, all of transportation, and of course, how we produce and circulate power in the first place. In every area, legislation needs to be like the EV Freedom Act. 4 things. Number 1, it has to be bold and even visionary, dripping with American innovation and creativity. Number 2, it has to be comprehensive, like the EV Freedom Act covering the whole national highway system. Number 3, it has to happen very fast. And number 4, it has to be inclusive and really even focused on frontline and vulnerable communities and the most affected workers. Unless we give workers in fossil fuel related industries a seat at the center of the table, I don't think we're going to achieve the profound and rapid change we clearly need. In addition to introducing my own legislation, I've worked to steer existing programs towards green investments. For example, I offered an amendment to the fiscal year 2021 Department of Transportation funding bill to ensure the popular infrastructure grants known as build grants prioritize green infrastructure projects, and I'm happy to share that that amendment passed the House. Our government has a crucial role to play in helping guide the transition to green futures to address the climate crisis urgently and comprehensively. Indeed, our children are telling us to stop telling them to reduce, reuse, recycle, and change other personal habits. They know that while changing light fixtures or thermostat temperatures does help raise consciousness and does have an impact at the margins, only smart, clear, and consistent government policy will lead to the systemic change that is our only hope of saving life on Earth as we know it. And visionary policy that shows the way forward is crucial for American businesses looking to become more sustainable, especially small local businesses who could benefit from government resources and grant opportunities to help them do so. And in this moment when business and workers are dealing with economic and health impacts of the pandemic, we have to be making investments in sustainable business to stimulate the economy for the long run. Our local leadership in Michigan's 9th District, which is brilliantly represented here, is doing the hard work of making a greener Michigan, and I'm delighted to be working alongside their efforts on a national level in Congress. My team and I continue to work tirelessly on legislation to address the climate crisis and bolster sustainability policy across all areas of our work. I'm really happy to be with you today. Looking forward to hearing the other panelists and to your questions. And with that, Dan, I'll throw it back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Congressman Levin. Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts over the next hour here. Now I'd like to introduce Professor Jeffrey Andresen, who is the state climatologist for the state of Michigan, and he's going to highlight how climate change is presently impacting our states, and through that, the need that we have to for investments and federal leadership. And Jeff, the screen is yours.
Very good. Thank you, Daniel. Can you see my screen?
It's coming through great.
Excellent. Well, thank you and good afternoon. And thank you, Representative Levin, for a very, very nice, eloquent intro. I'm gonna drill down a little bit. I want to address specifically climate here and on a local and more on a regional basis. And what is it that we see here, especially over the last couple decades? What's projected for the future? A little bit about well, information sources. But my title slide here. This is an image that some of you probably have seen before. You may have seen in person. This was an image taken from the Great Flood of August of 2014, where we had about 4 to 6 inches of rain in a 4-hour period across parts of the Detroit metro area, which caused catastrophic flooding. This event, well, it has the distinction, there were tens of thousands of homes and businesses severely damaged during this event, and you can see infrastructure, et cetera. It also has the distinction of probably being economically the worst weather-related disaster in Michigan history, even, well, including for inflation and so forth. But what it does is, I think it very well exemplifies some trends that we are dealing with right now, and at least some food for thought on where we are and where we're headed, because the issue of water, specifically too much water on the landscape, you're going to see is one of our major issues that we're dealing with now and very likely we'll have to deal with in the near future. If we look at 2 of the most commonly monitored variables here, temperatures on the left, annual precipitation on the right, so mean annual temperatures, you can see that Michigan and the Great Lakes region have become warmer with time. Much of the world has become warmer. The world is just definitely a warmer place than it used to be. A lot of that warming has taken place during the last half century, last 50 years. You can see in Michigan, this particular series goes back to the end of the 19th century, but you can see there were a couple periods, one in warming in the early part of the 20th century. There was actually a little bit of a cooling of about 1 degree Fahrenheit during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then around 1980, our temperatures have started to warm more rapidly. We've warmed about 2 degrees Fahrenheit on average since then. There has been some leveling off in the most recent decade. It's also important to note, though, that the warming here is not symmetrical. There is a seasonality to it. We've had more warming in the cold season and at night. Our minimum temperatures are increasing more rapidly than our daytime temperatures. So the diurnal range, the difference between the two is decreasing. And that's something we see in many other places or parts of the world. You can also make a case here for temperatures that there has been more variability over the last decade or two, some of the warmest years on record, and also some very cold years. You can probably remember the horrible winters of 2013, 14, 15, those 2 back-to-back. Those were the most severe winters in Michigan we'd had in over 100 years. You had to go back to 1911 to see that. But in general, Michigan has been warmer, but as I mentioned at the beginning, the most significant trend I think you could easily make is that it's wetter. And this is true for much of the Midwest, also portions of the Northeast as well. The chart you see here on the right are average precipitation totals. All rainfall plus all melted frozen precipitation as well goes into this. And you can see that since really the 1930s, the Dust Bowl era, the Dust Bowl decade, you can see, well, with a couple of exceptions, a steady increase in precipitation, especially over the last couple of decades. And at the very end there's a circle around 2019. 2019 set an all-time new record for the wettest year on record. 5 of the 6 wettest years on record have occurred in the last decade. You can see just very, very clearly that increase in precipitation. Now, not all locations in the state are quite like this, but in general, on average, about 10 to 15% more annual precipitation now than just 50 years ago. That's a lot of water. And there are a lot of impacts associated with that. The Great Lakes levels right now are certainly one of those as well. The increase in annual precipitation is due to 2 things. One, there's more days with precipitation. That's increasing. And we also have an increase in the number of extreme events, and the amount of precipitation per event is also increasing. So collectively between those 2, you can see some of the reason why we're headed upward. There have been a number of events associated with this trend, many like the southeastern Michigan floods of 2014. We had a terrible catastrophic flooding event in the Keweenaw Peninsula on Father's Day of 2018. We had another flooding event caused dam failure in Midland County here just this past year, earlier that was associated with very, very heavy rain. And here's one to throw out. This is also relatively recent. In July of last year, there was an event with training thunderstorms that moved over the same area repeatedly over and over, and had just short of 13 inches of rain fell in about a 12-hour period. That may not sound like a lot, but that's an all-time new record for a 24-hour total. This has occurred in Mason County, just to the east of Ludington in that part of the state. I think what's noteworthy about this is that the old record, just short of 10 inches at 9.78, which is down in the southwestern corner of the state, had stood since 1914, been around over 100 years. And not only was the record broken, but it was shattered. We almost 3 inches greater than the old record. So these are all pieces of an underlying trend that we see. And again, the incidence of these extreme precipitation events, I think clearly is the biggest threat that we face right now and probably will in the future in regard to damage or impacts from extreme weather. I mentioned the Great Lakes, and with the water supply in the lakes being basically a balance between what's coming in, which is the precipitation in the basin, and then what evaporates or goes out. And given all of this heavy precipitation we've seen over the last couple of years, we have been at or near record levels. This is the water level in Lake Erie here down at the bottom, a chart from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who's the standard, keep the metrics and measurements on the lakes. And thankfully, I guess if there's any good thing to say, while we're still at much above or near record levels, that we have begun our seasonal decline now into the cold season. And at least for this year, it looks as though we will finally go below some of the really high threshold damaging type event, even though we still will remain above average. You can see the forecast here, still well above the long-term normals. Just as importantly here, I think besides the high water levels and all of the flooding problems that we've had on the Great Lakes, one has to look at, this is an awful lot of data and I apologize for this, but what is important about this is we have about a century's worth of data from the Great Lakes. And what it suggests is that over time, especially in the most recent couple decades, that the lake levels, not only have they risen, but they have become more variable. And it's, most of you probably remembered, it wasn't too long ago, as recently as 2013, beginning of 2014, the Great Lakes were at or near record low levels. And we've gone in just basically several years time, we've gone from that very low level to a record high level. That is well, it's something that should be of concern to all of us, because it's one thing to adjust to a movement in the mean of a variable, whether it be lake level or precipitation or temperature, but it's a completely different one when we have an increase in variability. And that's something there's a great deal of research about right now, and something, again, that it's more difficult to adapt to or to cope with the variability. The images here, these are taken from Old Mission Peninsula up in Lake Michigan and northwestern lower, and you can see all of the dry lake bed here when it was very low, and then again 8 years later the same image with the area covered. We see many instances of that across the Great Lakes. So it's not just the increase in mean, it's also the variability, which is an issue as well here. There are some positive aspects of this trend, at least in terms of water. We still have droughts in Michigan, but they are less frequent and they are less severe than they have been in the past. And that's what this particular graphic shows. The greens are surplus, times of surplus precipitation. The oranges are the opposite. Again, the 1930s are the benchmark driest decade. They stand out. But ever since then, you can see we've had relatively less drought. This is at least in the warm season, but that's true across most months as well. As we look into the future, a lot of the projections, it depends on what one assumes about economic activity, but clearly all of the projections for the future call for warmer climate than is the case. That's true globally. It's also true here in the Great Lakes region. And for us specifically, looking at the latter part of this upcoming century, we have warming projected somewhere between 3.5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit on average. That again doesn't sound like much, but that kind of a change in over just a few decades period is a radical thing. It has rarely happened in our climate system, even geologically. And so it's not just the amount of the temperature, it's the rate of the change that should be of great concern or alarming. Most of the projections, not all, but many of them also call for an increase in precipitation, but there's a very important couple of flags or caveats with that. One is that it's not symmetrical around the season, just like the temperatures were. Most of the increase in precipitation occurs in these projections in the cold season. And of course, our landscape and our vegetation, et cetera, they all need the water in the warm season. And unfortunately, many of these projections suggest a leveling off, maybe even a decrease in summertime precipitation. That's a potential problem, even with the additional precip in the cold season. It also suggests that more of our precip with warmer temperatures would fall in liquid form than a frozen, or at least relative to the past. The other very important piece, and it might be even more important about the precipitation, is that our hydrologic cycle likely is intensifying with more extremes. And so you might have heard the statement that we can expect both more flooding events and more droughts. On the surface, that doesn't seem to make much sense, but there's one physical way that that can happen, and it's not a good one, but it is that even though we have more total precipitation, it falls on fewer days. And we have more extreme events. We also have longer periods of time in between the precipitation, which of course means that we could have drier landscapes, at least temporarily. And that's where that statement comes from. And the majority, many of those projections do suggest this as well, especially in the warm season. That's a big red flag. A lot of research now that could be a real challenge for both, well, certainly agricultural systems, also for natural vegetation as well. You can see increases in heavy precipitation. We're already seeing that now, numbers of hot days. That's one interesting one, the number of hot days so far, at least observed trends, we don't see much of a trend one direction or the other, or cold days for that matter. There hasn't been much of a change. There's been a little bit of warmer or milder extremes in the winter, but not for the number of hot days. The last one here, an increase in the frost-free season between the last freeze of the spring, the first freeze of the fall, definitely is increasing. Many areas at least 2 weeks just over the last few decades. So many of the trends that you see here that are projected for the future we already see them. We're already observing them. It gives one certainly a little bit more confidence in the outlooks and where they're pointing at. So that's a little bit of where we're headed. I just want to mention for some of those who might be interested, there are a number of, well, there are a large number of federal organizations, departments, agencies that are involved in climate science, climate research, and climate information, supplying that. One of those, which is supported by GLISA, and I'm involved with, GLISA is the Great Lakes Integrated Sciences and Assessments, and it basically is a NOAA-supported organization that seeks to try and provide some of the climate information for people to be better informed, to help make better decisions, to help to deal with or become more resilient to some of the variability which we have now and which is projected for the future. It's a joint effort between the University of Michigan and Michigan State University, and we're currently now beginning our 10th year. And well, we work with a number of organizations, some of them individual businesses and public organizations, and the goal here is to basically serve in between the research community and then the climate services community, and provide, again, objective and hopefully helpful information to people who need information about climate and its impacts. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. And if you're interested in GLISA, you saw the URL there. I'm happy to chat or talk to you. Be happy to provide information we could. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We're gonna, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat in the Q&A. We're gonna loop back around and have an open discussion time in just a few minutes here. Now I'd like to introduce Rifino Valentine, the founder and president of Valentine Distilling, who's going to talk briefly about his sustainability efforts, and then tell us his story about the challenges his organization has faced during the pandemic, and what business looks like for him now and in the months ahead.
Hey, yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. You know, I think to really understand what we are doing or trying to do with our green initiative is to understand first of, you know, why I started this company at all in the first place, why Valentine even exists as a company, because I think it all kind of plays into the same, it's all for kind of the same reason. I started this company, factory noises, we got to get past those. So I started this company. This would have been a business plan, 14 or 15 years ago. And it really began out of a realization or an understanding of what built the U.S. economy in the first place. And, I really think from the Industrial Revolution forward, it was quality manufacturing. In this country, we built some of the best stuff in the world. And you kind of juxtapose that in today's manufacturing climate, where we don't make a lot of stuff anymore, first of all. But then secondly, things that are produced here or globally, we've kind of entered, I call it a race to the bottom. Let's make things as fast and as cheap as possible. Maybe a Walmartization of the whole manufacturing thing. So I always tell this story. I grew up on a farm. We had a John Deere tractor. At the time, it was already 30 years old. My dad still uses that thing today. And you look at that, you buy a piece of furniture nowadays, you hope it lasts one or two moves, let alone generations. So the idea behind Valentine was, let's just get back and let's do things the proper way. Let's do things the right way. So with that as your whole philosophy, the Clean and Green initiative that we launched about 2 years ago now, really just kind of falls into place of let's just do things the right way. Let's just do things the way they were meant to be done. It might not be the cheapest, it might not be the fastest, but it's the way it should be done. The clean part of our initiative refers to the type of manufacturing that we do. No additives, and we use real products and real ingredients and that sort of thing. But the green part is an exciting part too. And the green part for us, I always tell people it is, if you look at it from a business person's standpoint or a financial standpoint, it really doesn't make sense yet. We hope this is going to change over time where it will make financial sense. But for now, we're really doing these things just because it should be done. Climate change is real. So let's at least, our little factory here in the grand scheme of things is probably not going to change things, but the number of times we've been emulated just in Michigan or across the country is what we do. We hope that people will emulate this too, and we hope that it will become more important, and we can show that it can be done in a distillery setting in this kind of manufacturing. Distilling in general is energy intensive, so it's in addition to energy intensive uses, we also consume large amounts of water. Not only the water that goes into the product, but also processed water. So the first phase of what we've done is reduce and reuse our energy. The later phases will be, we'll try to offset some of our energy usage. But the first things we do is now we recycle 95% of our processed water. Especially being in the Great Lakes state, water is valuable. We use water in all of our products that we sell. So water is important to us. So we figured instead of using, and just to kind of put this in perspective, a small operation like ours, while we're one of the larger craft distilleries in the country, we are tiny in the worldwide distilling industry. Our small plant uses almost 2,000 gallons of just processed water a day. Typically, even in the larger distilleries, that water will be pulled out of the ground and into drainage and sewer systems. So it really is consumed. We've installed systems that, like I said, will recapture about 95% of that. A couple of the other things we do is trying to take advantage of the Michigan climate that we have. We've installed some equipment where anytime the ambient temperature, so anytime the temperature outside is less than 40 degrees, 45 degrees maybe, we don't have to use any of our refrigeration systems here. The refrigeration system, the coolant systems in a distillery are probably one of the biggest electric consumable processes that we do. So that's another thing. And I think it's exciting for me because it's cold outside. Let's use that temperature, and you know, let's show other distilleries that it can be done this way. The other kind of the other interesting thing that we do, which maybe not unique just to us, some other distilleries do this, but I call it farm to bottle to farm. So in other words, we make all our liquor out of grain. So instead of taking a field of corn and making whiskey out of it, and then taking a field of corn and feeding a herd of cattle, we take that same field of corn, we take what we need out of it, which is really the starches and the carbohydrates, which the cattle don't want anyway. We leave a protein-rich spent grain, and then we give that right back to the farmers so they can feed it to the cattle. So really that same field of corn is being double purposed, or oftentimes it's not double purposed. So these are some of the first few initiatives before we get into some of the offsetting of the energy, which we want to get into. I've made this like a 10-year commitment at least. It'll probably end up being longer than that, but later in these 10 years, we want to do solar and wind and stuff like that actually help to offset the stuff.
Can you talk a little about how business has been during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's weird talking about it because it's been tough for everybody. So I understand that, but for us, we really got hit. You know, here we have kind of two different businesses. We operate our own retail place. And then we do, on the manufacturing side of the business, we distribute to 12 states and counting. We're always adding new states every year. And in that distribution, we distribute to bars and restaurants and liquor stores. Unfortunately, early on in the pandemic, some journalist wrote an article and said, hey, liquor sales are up because everybody's drinking at home. Well, what they forgot to say is that restaurants were closed and those sales went to absolute zero. So while liquor store sales did go up incrementally, it did not make up for what we lost as a company through the distribution to bars and restaurants. So we lost half of our distribution side, you know, straight away. We also lost our retail side for those first 3 months or so. So it was a pretty dramatic decline in business from that side. Very early on, you know, we weren't gonna turn to hand sanitizer at the beginning. You gotta remember, if anybody remembers, at least in my mind, well, this is gonna last a couple days or a couple weeks or whatever. You know, now we look back on it and it was like, hey, this might not be done in 2 years. But so anyway, over one day we decided, let's do hand sanitizer. Again, it's probably the right thing to do. People need it. Let's do it. That turned out to be a huge benefit. We donated a ton of it, but we also sold a ton of it. And for the first couple months, that really just kept us afloat. Otherwise, it would have been really dire. And just to give an idea of the impact of the sanitizer, we buy bottles, 2 or 3 times a year probably. And the lead time on our glass is several months, 3 or 4 months. So our glass supplies are, tightly managed. In the first 3 weeks, we bottled our entire year's supply of gin and whiskey bottles in hand sanitizer. We couldn't get plastic for one, so we were putting in our liquor bottles. But it was that kind of demand that early on it called for it. The market called for that. So that really got us through that early part. And then, bars and restaurants opened back up. We have seen probably 25 or 30% of our bar and restaurant accounts that haven't opened and probably won't open ever again. It'll probably take us years to build that business back to where it was. And then now, we've gotten by with the summertime. Bars bars and restaurants have done their outdoor seating. I think personally this will be the most challenging time for that side of our business and the restaurants in general. The next 3 or 4 months, as the temperature gets colder, and who knows what's going to happen. But so we're really looking for the most challenging time for us, October, November, December, January, but we'll see.
Thank you so much, Rifino, for telling us your story. And I did manage to find myself a bottle of your product over the weekend, and it's the whole family agrees it's some great stuff. And thank you for taking your time today. And now I'd like to turn it over to someone who I believe also is quite familiar with your product, or at least I hope so.
Oh yeah.
Mayor Piana, please tell us what's going on in Ferndale.
Well, I want to take us back to 2014 during the floods that had already been mentioned. It was a city council meeting. We were about to start, and our police chief came in and said, "Our city hall basement is flooding. We need to evacuate the building, and we need to cancel the council meeting now." And this was the torrential rain that brought massive flooding. I basically waded out to my car in my bare feet, and the water was almost entering into my car. And I drove perilously home to find my husband standing on a toilet plunger over the drain in my basement, trying to prevent water coming up into our basement. We were like many other homeowners in Ferndale and across the region, but in Ferndale, we were one of 80% of homes in our city that flooded. And this really taught our city, and I think cities everywhere, that our infrastructure is not built to withstand these massive changes in weather events. And this is when Ferndale was just adopting its new master plan, and we were incorporating sustainability into all areas of the city as we plotted out the next 5 years of how the city was going to grow and what we were going to tackle as a community to strengthen the community. And the master plan, if you all don't know, is the blueprint of how the city is going to grow and how the community is going to, what the community desires and how it's going to grow. And that was in 2015, and we're at the 5-year mark. But something happened during this progression, and from 2014 to this new master plan. In 2017, we hired our first city sustainability manager, Erin Quintel, and because the master plan said we need to really focus on putting some of these initiatives that our residents want, like more trees in our community, green infrastructure. So these were the things that we were taking a look at, and we didn't have the right person in place to accelerate some of these projects. So in 2017, we hired our first sustainability planner, and she has been working on key initiatives of changing out the street lights in our city for LEDs to save energy and costs to the taxpayer in our communities. She has been working on a solar carport for a cover over our police department cars because they don't have a garage. And she's been accelerating planting more trees in our community because we only have 30% tree cover, which is, we should be at 40% like cities in the region and like other cities in the region. And so we have been really focused as a community and as a city. And I was city council member at this time. I just became mayor in this past January. And, just like not planning for 100-year hazardous, weather events that you've never had to experience before, we've never had to experience a pandemic. There's been no playbook for any city or any level of government, maybe the federal government, for a pandemic. And so really, I think what the pandemic has taught me is the importance of experimentation, rapid experimentation, not only by our business owners, but by your government, your local government, because all those rules don't seem to apply when you're trying to help businesses survive, or help your residents navigate these challenges, impacts to their job, how they get to work. And so when you bring together the pandemic of the health side and you pull in the what's happening with the climate changes to our environment, really what it is that we really need to take a very different view and not look at these two separate events as siloed, but rather where's the connectedness and the interconnectivity of what is impacting our communities. And so in this past year, the City Council, under my leadership as mayor, we passed a climate crisis resolution. And my real intention here was to elevate and accelerate what the city is doing, because we have a choice. We can rise to the occasion and be a part of the solution to address this global problem, even though we're only 4 square miles to do our part, or we continue the status quo. And for me, the status quo as a local government does not respond to the needs of our community, to the needs of our businesses, and nor do I view ourselves as a strong partner for regional change if we rely on the status quo and be a part of that. So as part of this crisis, this climate crisis, a month later, we also passed anti-racism resolution, a declaration of anti-racism. So the just transition of a climate, of making sure that we are shifting to an economy that is just and fair and equitable and sustainable. We also must do that through the lens of tackling and addressing structural racism. So really intense conversations this year about what we really need to do to strengthen our community and create opportunity not only for our residents, but for our business owners. And so we're at this point where we have joined climate mayors. We are a small city joining the national conversation of mayors, making sure that their cities are doing what they need to do to lower their carbon footprint. And I've also joined the Covenant of Mayors for Energy and Climate, which is the international organization that is bringing cities across the globe to work on the same problems in our own unique ways and addressing it with the resources we have locally. And my goal for this year is resetting our organization as a city organization around doing a greenhouse gas inventory and making sure that we can become a carbon neutral city. And we don't have the data to say we can become carbon neutral by 2050. I don't want to say we can become carbon neutral by 2040 without the data, because without the data, it's just a goal that perhaps we can't attain. And so that's kind of where we are right now as a city. And I am leveraging the Mayor's Business Council, which was a convening of our largest industrial business owners in our community, and Rifino was a part of it under the former mayor. I'm carrying this initiative forward because it's so critical of taking the expertise and the knowledge of our business owners and leveraging that for not only the Ferndale's needs, but how do we cross-pollinate business to business, their expertise within our own community. And our next step, because we haven't been able to meet as a Mayor's Business Council, is to really talk about that this year over Zoom and say, here's where the city's resetting and rising to the occasion of creating a greenhouse gas inventory for community-wide, and then figuring out how to get that data with the right partner, and then doing a climate action plan in partnership with updating our master land use plan next year. So we are starting the sole planning cycle over again, but with a whole new framework around reducing our carbon footprint. I think we are the first city in Oakland County to set this vision as a city. And I am looking for partners to help us do that, because the organizations around here are not set up to help small cities reduce its carbon footprint in a direct, meaningful way. And I feel like Michigan is just catching up. But the congressman has been a real key asset in helping set up a new federal policy to make this really helpful for cities. And our governor just set a carbon neutrality goal at 2050. And so Ferndale, how we are going to answer that call is by setting and figuring out what are our emissions and how do we lower them. And I can tell you that it's going to be in buildings and transportation. And that is the biggest area for me, because we have 16 lanes of MDOT highway that cross our community. And so that is, we have a huge section of emissions over highways in our community. And that is something that we need to take a look at, which is why transportation is so important to me. So the real key takeaways here is that we're a small city. We've tackled a big city approach to dealing with reducing our carbon footprint and trying to figure out how to do it with the resources we have in order to accelerate what our community, what our residents have expressed desire for. And that is be a better steward of our environment and do it from the lens of a local government. And then, designing our evolution from being an environmental, sustainability friendly ethos city to a climate carbon neutral city. And the effort behind the scenes from an organizational structure, internal processes, is really a massive redesign and restructuring. And we are now just talking as a staff and council what that looks like. So at the end of the day, I am hopeful and optimistic because we're all in this together. Ferndale is doing its part to contribute to lowering not only our city's greenhouse gas emissions, but the state's, and hopefully being part of the global effort to make sure our climate doesn't increase by 2%. And so looking for strong partners, and our business owners are part of that conversation, and look forward just to be figuring this all out and experimenting. And that's what I think our local government is going to be doing over the next year as we continue to navigate through the pandemic, continue to navigate the climate action that is needed, and continuing to figure out how to do economic recovery with our businesses. So I hope you all will be with me and supportive, and ask your local government leaders to do the same.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I can say at least we will definitely be with you. And now, last but not least, I'd like to introduce Julie Lyons Bricker, who will be talking about her work at the City of Royal Oak.
Thank you, Dan. I'm thrilled to be part of this forum. Thank you for asking me to join on. So my name is Julie Lyons Bricker, and I'm the Energy and Sustainability Manager for the City of Royal Oak. And although we've been doing multiple initiatives over the course of 5 to 10 years that fall under the sustainability heading, we're just in the early stages of making our sustainability journey more formal. And so I'm going to dive in a little bit into what we're doing right now. 3 pieces are one, formally recognizing the climate crisis as an emergency, gathering information for data-driven goals and actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and energy waste, and engaging stakeholders, including our commission-appointed Environmental Advisory Board. So for us, it was really important that Oakland County approved a climate emergency resolution last year, as it offered a great example to our city of larger scale elected leadership moving forward with the climate conversation. And so a huge thank you goes out to Oakland County Commissioners from us. Our climate emergency resolution was passed in July, and it is framed in a way that's not only around global climate issues, but also local issues, like the recent extreme precipitation events and flooding we've experienced, transmission of insect-borne diseases like the West Nile virus and the equine encephalitis, and of course, air quality. We think the messaging needs to be explicitly relevant to our audience, as well as offer that global perspective. So the resolution for us acts as one of the early foundational steps in our sustainability journey. It directs staff to develop a baseline greenhouse gas emissions inventory and to collaborate with stakeholders to bring greenhouse gas reduction targets to the Commission for review. And then in turn, these targets will help guide our climate action goals within our upcoming sustainability plan. So another major foundational step for our work was earning the U.S. Green Building Council's Lead for City certification this spring. Through that robust certification process, current sustainability initiatives were inventoried in 5 major categories: energy, waste, water, transportation, and quality of life. These categories have resilience and equity embedded within them, and analyzing our current practices was really a great exercise to understand where our gaps are and where many opportunities lie. So for example, we had an opportunity to build a relationship with the Beaumont Hospital and SOCWA around resilience and hazard mitigation. That process also alerted us that our boards and committees have the opportunity to become more representative of our community in terms of race, gender, and age. The Lead for Cities program encourages a community to use it as a pathway to strive for additional sustainability initiatives and equity. And we are shooting for Leads for Cities Silver in the next year or so. Our greenhouse gas inventory is mostly complete at this point. And what we see very clearly is that residential energy, commercial electric, and transportation are the highest emitting sectors for the city. And we expect these are the highest emitting sectors in many other cities across the nation. So we're viewing energy waste reduction in our municipal buildings, the conversion of street lights to LEDs, and fleet conversion to alternative vehicles as first steps in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Having buy-in and on-the-ground assistance from elected county, state, and federal leaders would be so helpful to our future efforts. And beyond gathering data, we are beginning our stakeholder engagement for input into the citywide sustainability plan. We are so lucky to have an unbelievably well-qualified group of residents leading our Royal Oak Environmental Advisory Board. The board will collaborate with staff for the development of the sustainability plan, bring recommendations to the commissions about all things sustainable, and participate in community outreach. The city is also committed to sharing experiences and best practices with other cities and communities about the work that we've done. And certainly participating with Aaron from Ferndale has been a joy, as well as working with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. So we also participate in the Michigan Green Communities and as a member of the U.S. Green Building Council Detroit chapter. Our mayor, Michael Fournier, has also signed on to the Climate Mayors, United States Conference of Mayors, and Sierra Club's Ready for 100. So we are working very hard at the city level, especially during this pandemic, to affect change, but really need public sector leaders, state and federal, to implement systemic programs, grants, and tax breaks that reach the city and community levels for electric vehicles and related infrastructure, sustainability plan development, continued support of robust energy efficiency programs, and installation of solar technologies, all of which have a jobs creation and support component. Good for sustainable business. As I was writing that last part, I recognized that this is something that we've been saying for years and years, and although that we've made some inroads, it's still readily needed. So that's what I have so far about our efforts in Royal Oak. Stay tuned, lots more to come, and thanks again for having me on this forum. I appreciate speaking with all of the others.
Thank you so much, Julie. Mike Shesterkin, you had an initial question, right?
Yeah, thank you, Dan, and thank you for putting this on today. It's been great to collaborate with you and the rest of our cross-state partners on advancing progressive policy in the state. I wanted to just ask Representative Levin, who had talked a bit about the importance of policy at the beginning of the talk, how should the federal government begin leading on climate change and resolving the pandemic issues?
Wow. Well, that's big, Mike. 2 big questions. First, let me just say what a treat it's been to hear Julie and Melanie and Rifino talk. I mean, I'm pretty proud as a congressperson to have these incredible leaders in business and government working on climate change. It's very exciting, and resiliency more broadly, as Rifino was talking about. And I won't get into the flood, but I just have to say this. Julie, I don't know if you, on the night, right after the flood, I was going to the Royal Oak City Council for them to join Lean Green Michigan. And it was the immediate council meeting after the flood. And so many citizens came in to complain about the disaster at their house that by the time it got, by my turn to talk about them joining Lean Green Michigan, they were just like, whatever, we're all in. Because, I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but Melanie, it was such a disaster for people. It was such a disaster, and we just have to deal with it. So that brings me back to your question, Mike. I mean, wow, on COVID-19, we need national leadership. What the federal government needs to do, should have been doing since the beginning, is saying, okay, yes, the buck stops here. This is the worst public health crisis in a century in our country, and it's devastating the world. We're going to use the full power of the Defense Production Act to procure and make everything we need, first of all, to identify it across testing, across treatment, and across personal protection, all of that, and make everything we need. It'd be super patriotic. Look at Rufino's example. Dude, I was like, wait a minute, I could have gotten hand sanitizers in one of your bottles. I mean, that would be like a collector's item. I mean, but companies across the country, and certainly across my district, have been stepping up. But you know what? A company can't put, like, there's a manufacturer, for example, that stepped up to make, and they just started making face shields. And the demand for them wasn't as much as they thought. Now they could make N95 masks, but they would literally lose their company if they make more than is needed. Well, I tell you what, the Defense Production Act says to the president, you can give guaranteed contracts to companies to make what you need. And so then the company's not taking the risk for getting in this patriotic game of saving the American people from unnecessary death and infection. So we need to do that. And, you know, we certainly need a national system of testing and contact tracing and supported isolation. And we could put so many restaurants in Ferndale and elsewhere, and Royal Oak, so many hotels back in business by saying, okay, people who need to isolate, you know what, if they have 2 kids at home or a group house, they can't isolate at home, let's put them in a hotel, pay the hotel. Let's pay some restaurants to feed them. Rufino, I don't think we can pay for them to have booze, so that's just a, you know. But, and then on climate change, super quickly, Mike, we need to get back in the Paris climate, you know, agreement. We need to set a date certain by which all new buildings need to be zero net energy or better, and a different date for different kinds of buildings, because it's easier for a house than it is for an apartment building than it is, you know, a factory will be the last thing, right? But we need to do all of that. We need to, you know, both in government procurement and in policy, set out real specific goals and timelines for everything about transportation. So the government should just be doing electric fleets. I've been to factories in our district where great companies are retrofitting school buses to be electric school buses. You know, I mean, we could be creating a lot of great jobs. And I saw another question about in the chat, or the questions about from my friend John Kinch about how Michigan can, you know, be position itself. The answer is onshore manufacturing. Bring things back. Joe Biden is going to be all about that if he becomes president. And, you know, I mean, I've said to my dear friend Mary Barra and GM, I ain't buying that very cool Chevy Blazer. I don't buy any gas vehicles anymore, but if I did, you know, I'm not buying a Chevy Blazer because it's made in Mexico. Start making everything here, bring stuff back, and it's going to be looked upon super favorably. I think there will be a lot of incentives for that. Let me just close with this. Rufino, you were so eloquent about making stuff here. Germany has higher labor costs and much higher unionization rates than the United States, but it gets twice as much, not a little bit more, twice as much of its GDP from manufacturing. So don't tell me we can't afford it or we can't do it here. It's because they have industrial policy, Mike, and we can do that here. So that's a little bit about both questions.
Outstanding. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, everyone. That is our program here today, as far as our regular scheduled program. If you do have questions remaining, please feel free to put those in the chats, and we can do our best to see that those are answered. I'd like to again thank Congressman Levin for taking the time today. Thank you, Mayor Piana. You notice I have a stutter, just like Joe Biden, that occasionally comes out. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Rifino, and as well as the Southeast Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, the Environmental Defense Fund, and the American Sustainable Business Council, and of course our state climatologist, Jeffrey Andresen. Really appreciate all your supports, and if you are interested, our next event is this coming Thursday, featuring DTE Gas, talking about their plans to go carbon neutral in the next few decades here. And my colleague Rose will drop a link in before we wrap. And that is our program today. If you have further questions, please feel free to ask them.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
So good to see you, Melanie and Julie and Rifino. I'll look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Great.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks again.
Bye.
I feel like I should ask you for a large, if I can find my way to a case of bottles, because we have a large event coming up next week.
Come down for a tour. We do safe socially distanced tours.
I might take you. I'll try to take you up on that. Again, it's been great having you involved, and I really appreciate the chance to meet you this past week. I was going to say the same to Julie, but she looks like she dropped off. And you have, of all the ones you've done, I think you've had the most fantastic background of anyone that we've had on a Zoom thus far.
Oh.
Do you have any bottles of the hand sanitizer left?
You know, as Congressman Levin was talking about, Defense Production Act and being able to make stuff and have guaranteed contracts, we have a ton of it left. So we do have sanitizer in bottles. So. But yeah, anybody who wants a tour. Actually, we're not doing public tours, but we can set up some private things for tours down here and whatnot. Great. And so thanks again. I think we'll be in touch with some follow-up stuff in the near future here. And if you haven't met Mike Shesterkin, he runs a similar program out of Southeast Michigan. It has some events coming up as well, and I think Marta may have taken off already.
Yeah, I think we connected maybe through email one time, Rufino. But anyways, it's good to meet you online. And I made a note. I mean, might set up a tour of the distillery, a small one, anyways.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime. I'd love to show you around.
Yeah, what you guys are doing is great. It's outstanding. So yeah, it'd be fun.
All right, I think we've got all the questions that were going to come in. So thanks again, Rufino. Thanks again, Mike.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for your work.